Welcome to the Melanin Jelly Project Conversations, a podcast that celebrates diversity and representation in children's storytelling, entertainment, and edutainment. I am the host, Olunosen Louisa Ivaze. On this podcast, I chat with authors and creators of children's books, entertainment, and edutainment. This is also a collaboration with the Ottawa Black Book Club. So welcome Patti Demma, author of Timmy is Resilient.
Hi.
Teaching children to walk through tough times. So welcome, Patti, to the Melanin Jelly Project podcast. My name is Olunosen Louisa Ivaze. Thank you for sending your generosity and for sending your book. Because when I decided to start this podcast and I said I wanted to do a podcast that celebrates representation and diversity in children's stories, a lot of people thought I was talking about only race. People forget that representation is a really large umbrella.
Absolutely.
And so many things come under it. So, and I set this podcast up to celebrate diversity and representation in children's storytelling. I'm also the founder of the Ottawa Black Book Club, where we are focused on books by authors of African and Black descent. So, Patti, go ahead. Tell me about yourself and what inspired you to write this book. Tell me what you do. Just talk about you and story.
Okay, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. So I was a preschool teacher for many, many years, 20 some years. And then I started working with families. So I saw behaviors and I saw children struggling with just adapting to maybe coming to school or settling down, just in the mornings, or just having a really hard time through the day at school. Then I started working with families and I saw the same thing in adults, right? Like it wasn't any different. The adults were struggling sort of the same way. And this was before we started talking about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, and the effects of trauma on children who then become adults, right? So I started working with families, and then I started working with seniors, which is the program that I work with now. And I see the effects. I see the health effects. I see all the different effects of what we would just call like a difficult life. A life maybe in poverty, or a life struggling to just make ends meet. But now, knowing about ACEs, we understand that when really tough things happen in childhood, that's going to affect their mental and physical health throughout their whole lives. So that's just a fact, right? It's going to affect you. But if you have supports and you understand as a community how to support people who are going through hard times, it doesn't necessarily have to become a mental health or physical health issue. So a couple of the quotes that I like to use, Dr. Anda said, what is predictable is preventable.
Okay.
So we know children who are going through ACEs, and there are 10 different categories of ACEs, and there are 5 different categories of community ACEs, which are just really difficult situations for kids to handle. We're talking about abuse. We're talking about living in poverty. We're talking about parents being on drugs, or parents just not being able to take care of them. We're talking about physical or sexual violence against children. These are terrible things, and children will be affected by them. However, if the community understands that a child who's going through a struggle, we don't have to know what the struggle is, right? Like we don't have to find out exactly what's happening within the family walls to know the family needs support and to know the child needs support. And one caring, loving adult could support this child and stop some of those physical and mental occurrences from happening, because they will feel loved, they will feel seen and heard. And even though like some really terrible things may have happened, it can negate some of those mental and physical effects of toxic stress, right? So that's why when I learned all this information, I realized there really wasn't a way for children when I was working in preschool to learn how to use these skills, to learn how to understand how to connect with your community, so that if you're having a tough time, you have support and you won't necessarily become sicker because you held it in.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to talk to us more about ACEs. Say it again, ACEs, what does it mean?
Yes, absolutely. So ACEs is adverse childhood experiences.
So adverse childhood experiences. Why I want you to talk more about ACEs is because a lot of adults take a lot of things for granted. They just assume because children are children, they don't have feelings. And you can subject them to all kinds of trauma, and they'll outgrow it. That's what some people say, especially in different cultures, in cultures that are not Western. A lot of people.
Okay, so what's really interesting, let me share with you what's really cool about this. So now it's become science. There are two things that they look at that really show how it affects children. So when somebody learns it, you recognize, okay, maybe my culture wasn't doing it exactly right, because now I see how it's affecting the brain. Now I see how it affects the nervous system. Okay. So let me just explain something really kind of cool and basic that can help people understand how it's affecting your child. So there's two different parts of the brain that I like to talk about. Okay. The frontal part is the part you and I are using now. It's our frontal lobe. And that's where you expect children to be in when they're in school, right? Is that part of their brain. Okay. But when we're in our fight, flight, or freeze, which is when we've been triggered and we're upset, we're in a different part of our brain. We're in our limbic system, which is right in the back, in the brain stem, which also is connected through your whole nervous system. So now imagine a child like Timmy in my book hears a loud noise. Now maybe he lives in a home of violence, maybe he lives in a community of violence. And so a loud noise isn't just like a pot falling off a shelf, or maybe it is, but he's heard some other really scary noises. So this threw him off. And he had to go to school all stressed out through his whole nervous system. Couldn't concentrate. So if he got to school and his teacher got mad about it and was aggravated that he wasn't focused and wasn't listening and couldn't concentrate, and some children then even act out on top of that, you're never going to get out of that part of your brain. You're never going to be able to calm your nervous system down. And if your nervous system is heightened all the time, it's going to make you sick, right? Because your heart is racing, your stomach hurts, your head is hurting, and those types of things can affect you in the long term as well. Yeah. So there are, in science, toxic stress effects that show up later, because this child's been under duress, right? And there's never been a time where someone's taken them away and said, hey, I got you. Now, in my book, we use, the first thing that Timmy does is he uses peer support, which is really important for people to understand. If you have a child who really is not experiencing positive peer support, then I encourage you to help them find a group or club that does give them positive peer support. If they're in the LGBTQ community, you know, call the Trevor Project, find people for them. Don't let people stand out and struggle. Don't have your child come home and just say, oh, they're just, they're just being bullied. They can't find friends. No, we have to help them. Peer support is so important. So in my book, peer support is one of the ways that Timmy worked his way through it.
Okay, it makes sense, because many adults, you realize that in my course of interacting with people, you realize that a lot of adults still have struggle with unresolved childhood traumas that they are still dealing with. And many times, some of them haven't accepted that is what they're dealing with. They just go, you know what? It's life. And these are the things. Okay, so let me come to your book.
Okay.
So first of all, Cameron Moss, amazing, 10-year-old, genius.
She is a genius.
Yes.
I can't even with her. Every picture she sent to me, I felt like I was opening a gift. I wrote this book. I'm not an artist at all. She actually designed the logo behind me as well.
Oh, okay.
On the back of the book, she drew that.
Yeah.
That's her actual drawing. And then we had it digitized. But so I had written the words for what I thought the picture should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then she sent me her pictures, and I was just, I don't know, she captured this boy and his struggle and his fear.
And she started, and what I like with the pictures is I like how the picture started from a gray shade and then pops of color all the way, to the end. There's a gradual growth. You see that?
Yeah, and that's really what I think, having worked with such young children, I wanted to make sure that children of all ages could kind of see a growth.
Okay.
It didn't start out great. It's gray, it's depressing. Even the littlest children could see that's kind of gray and depressing. And then you could see him sitting on the bench with Jill and Susie.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think Susie's shirt turns blue. And because that was the first moment that he started to find some safety and some support. And that was the first moment where it wasn't so gray and bleak anymore. And really what scares me is that there are so many children and families that don't know that this could be a path to growth and resilience, because they know they're sending their child to school to possibly sit gray and bleak on the bench. Or they don't understand when they send their kid off to school really upset that they may end up sitting gray and bleak on the bench. So I feel like when families get this book, it teaches children to reach out, because in this book, Timmy talks to his teacher. Mm-hmm. That makes him feel better too. And then he starts saying nice things about himself. And then he remembers those are protective factors. So all of the things that I'm talking about are considered protective factors, right? Things that you can put into your life that help you if you feel like you're falling. We all have somebody we call or someplace we go, but we need those for our children too.
Okay.
They need to be able to trust people.
Okay. So as a writer, how important do you think it is for us to tell representative stories? Like this kind of story now, you're touching on a very sensitive issue. How important do you think it is for writers to tell these kind of stories where children going through similar experiences can just easily open it up and go, oh, not all children start off happy, but this is the child sad like me, and then in the end, oh, he's okay. How important do you think it is?
Well, I feel like failure has always had a bad connotation. Mm-hmm. But I feel like failure is the way that we learn to grow. So struggles are the way we learn to grow. But if you don't ever struggle, if everything starts out happy and rosy, that expectation can't be met. It just can't be met. Not everything is always rosy. But if you understand that when you're struggling, I need to speak to some friends. I need to speak to a trusting adult. I need to go with, whoever it is that I trust, that I feel safe with, because that's going to help me get through this.
Okay.
And I think that it's really important for us to be telling these stories. I feel that if they're not out there and we're all just making everything rosy, that expectations are going to be set for families that they can't meet.
Okay. So what are some of the challenges? So let me talk to you about your writing process, the process of writing the story. What are some of the challenges you think authors experience when trying to tell authentic stories about such sensitive issues? How much is too much? How little is too little?
It's a really great question. So I think that when you're it's who you're planning for your audience. If I was writing a book for these same topics and talking to 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, I probably would go a different route. The story wouldn't be about a child who was scared. The story would be about a child who really felt alone.
Okay.
Or I don't even mention loneliness in this book at all. But I feel like if you are feeling lonely and you know how to get to your protective factors, that's going to support you. And I feel like in a book for those children, I would describe the feeling differently. And then if I were talking just to adults, I would have to give forgiveness, because we didn't know this information when we were kids. We didn't know this information when we were raising our children. So for adults, I would be sharing with them, we didn't know it then. We do now. So now we just have to do better. Now we just have to know that the things children are seeing and hearing and being exposed to are impacting them.
Okay.
And then if we want to go one step deeper, historical trauma truly does affect our genetics. And we are predispositioned for certain things because we have historical trauma built into our genetics. If families know that, and there's still, that's, so much information, but when families understand that a child is reacting, where in their brain they are, why they might be reacting, so the family doesn't feel like, why are you crying? It's not that big of a deal. We've been through it. We got through it. If they understand that maybe, because you went through it, it might even be a little bit worse for this child. This might be triggering for them. And then it's obviously triggering for you because you went through it. Just knowing that, empathy to yourself and empathy to the child is going to change the way I think families deal with children's behaviors in general.
Okay. Because I know that I read somewhere where they say the body remembers. Yeah, even though you suppressed it, sometimes that knee-jerk reaction to things, it's like sometimes the way we react to certain smells.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, you smell certain things, maybe it's baking, cookies or something, you just go, as a child, I used to love this. Or sometimes for me, what smells do that for me, music does that for me. I listen to some songs and I remember, ooh, as a kid, when they talk about...
Now think about, I want to put you inside your body. What do you feel when you're hearing your favorite song and smelling your favorite cookies? Where do you feel it?
That's a good question. I don't know now if it's my head or my heart. But I don't know. I just feel it all over. I'm emotional. I'm sentimental, Yeah.
Now imagine, I hate to do this to you, but imagine if the worst day of your life involved that particular song and sugar cookies, and how you might feel that through your whole body if some trauma as a child was going on. And then nobody really helped you through it. So you just kind of went through it. Imagine that trigger, and how now those sugar cookies and that song, and you don't even maybe realize it. You just all of a sudden are in a mood.
Okay, so what you just said now, sausages did that to me. Now remembering sausages, I used to love sausages. But I think when I was much younger, one of those days, I think I just decided to binge. And I had all these sausages fried, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna eat everything. And then the next thing, my belly started to ache and I started to throw up. And since that day, I haven't touched sausages till today.
Right, because it's the sausage's fault and not the binging. Yeah. But you get that visceral feeling through your whole body.
When I perceive, even when I walk into restaurants, as nice as the smell is, it just takes me back to that day, and I don't touch them. I just go, you know what? No, lovely, good taste, but not for me.
Interesting, right? And so now imagine if you were eating the sausage and then you saw something really horrible between your family members, or if the sausages, I don't know, just, were bad because your family didn't have the funds to get good food and you were eating bad, there just could be so many ways that gets trapped in your body and in the way you remember. So what I want people to know is on that really bad day, when the child's eating the sausage, you don't know what's going to be the trigger, but let's just say the child's eating the sausage and they experience something really terrible.
Yeah.
That's the time that you need to wrap them in protective factors. You need to make sure that there are people around them that love them and let them know that it's going to be okay and that they're there to support them. And if they want to talk about it, it's okay. And if they don't want to talk about it, it's okay, but we're not going to pretend it didn't happen.
Oh, that's another important thing. We are not going to pretend it didn't happen. So in a lot of families and in a lot of cultures, because I was coming to that, I was going to ask you how you deal with that when you're dealing with people from different cultures. Because we have cultures where they go, I'll give you an example, abuse, molestation. In the West, people talk about it. Yeah, people go to court. But in many African societies and in many communities, especially if that abuse and molestation was done by which is usually a close family member, many times there's the culture of silence. They don't talk about it. All they just do is they remove the child from that environment, or that molester is sent away, no consequences. And then that child is just asked not to talk about it, just move on with your life. Oh, sometimes it never happened. So when you deal with people from other cultures, how do you manage such situations? Cultures where it is not a tradition to hug your child and say, I love you. Cultures
right, absolutely.
Where discipline, where it is part of the culture to spank a child when a child does wrong. It's not abuse per se, because I'm correcting you. So how do you deal with people? How do you take cultural values into consideration when you are dealing with such cases?
So let's talk about throwing a shoe across the room at a child. Is that abuse? I don't know if it's a pointy shoe and it hits them in the eye. Yeah, that's abusive. But if you're just, there's sometimes a parent may do something cultural that they were raised with, and it may not be traumatic. Okay. Could just be a thing that happens. Do I recommend throwing shoes at children? No. But if that was something that happened to you and you did it and you don't think it's anything terrible, I'm not calling you a child abuser. I'm going to understand this is what culturally was passed down. What I'm going to say is watch for your child. Watch for them to get upset. Watch for them to be having behaviors that you don't understand, and make sure that they know that they could talk to you. The silence thing is not okay. Telling a child to be silent is not okay. And then what I can show you is the brain and how it affects the brain and the development of the brain. Because if you're in your limbic system, you can't focus on school. And you can't be abused at home and then go to school and concentrate. You can ignore it, but you can't then be the best, academic student you can be. And then you get put in school and people have expectations of you. So what I'm going to say to communities that are abusing their children, stop abusing your children. It's going to affect them. They're going to turn into behaviors or become very unhealthy. And what I'm going to say to parents who are saying, keep it quiet, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to say blow up your whole family, but make sure that child is somebody to talk to about what has happened to them. They're important. They have to feel safe. They have to feel seen and heard. I understand that somebody may send somebody away for violating a child. Imagine how insignificant that child feels in that moment. And then they're going to carry that on forever. And everything that we smelled, tasted, touched, all in that period of time is going to be connected to when we felt powerless and helpless, right? So as a parent, something happened, culturally, you don't want to blow up the whole family because, somebody's wedding is this weekend and everyone's going to be there and you love your family. But tell that child it wasn't okay. Tell them we sent that person away because it wasn't okay and we love you and we're sorry that happened to you. And if you need to talk about it, who do you feel safe talking about it to? And, the other thing about sexual abuse in communities is it does get passed down. And there's that silence. And when those people become adults, what do you do with all that? Where does it go? How do you handle it? Where does it sit? It's got to sit somewhere inside you. Is it making you sick? Is it making you mentally unhealthy? But if somebody, even now, after these things have happened to you, if somebody really says, you know what, I hear you, and I really feel bad for that child in you that happened to, and let's talk about that, it could help. It could help knowing you have a caring, supportive person in your life who knows you went through it and who was supportive for you when you needed it. Maybe you didn't need it at 12 and 13 because you were told not to talk about it. But now as an adult, you can't concentrate at work. You don't understand why.
Yeah, I think trust. I think it's very important for children to know that they can come to adults, go to adults to talk to them. Some children live in constant fear of adults. I don't want to go tell my mom because she might just yell and say, oh, what was I doing there? When horrible things happen in families. I've seen documentaries where I saw a documentary where I think it was a father who had been molesting this little girl from when she was 3 years old till when she was 10. And when her mom was accosted and asked about it, the mom said, well, she was prancing around in loose clothing, in provocative clothing, and 2, she took my man. And I'm wondering, it's your duty as a mother to protect this kid. Now this child has been infected with HIV by the father. And that is all you have to say. And it just takes me back to, I live a life of gratitude. And a lot of things we take for granted, especially for those of us from privileged backgrounds. I come from a very privileged background. And I grew up, we had maids and all of that.
Nice.
And then I now start to ask myself questions about children who didn't have access to all of these things. You just take it for granted that, yeah. That's your life, that's your story, deal with it. But
what really I find interesting is, the more we think about it, the more we see and understand. And I feel like that's what this conversation does.
Yes.
It's not necessarily to blame anybody. It's not necessarily to make you feel bad. It's to open your eyes that, children are really impacted by these things. So I want to talk about the child who can't just take one out of the bowl.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't understand it for years. It says take one, so you take one. There were always those children that just couldn't do it. But I had a meal on the table every day when I was a child. I never skipped a meal. So now I see a child who can't take one and I think, oh my gosh, what if they want one for their brother? Because they're not gonna have this experience. Or what if they need one for later because it's the only food they're gonna get? I just feel like this whole process of thinking about childhood exposure to trauma, if we talk about it, we can maybe have a little more empathy for children that are acting out, for behaviors that we're seeing that we don't understand, and even for adults when we see behaviors we don't understand or acting out and we don't understand it because I'm not triggered by sausage, so I'm not going to understand that.
Yeah,
I think just building the empathy.
Yeah, the empathy and checking in. How are you doing? Are you guys okay? Have you eaten today? When we were growing up, I remember we lived in the government reserved quarters. So in many countries that were colonized by the British, we had we call them GRAs, this government reserved center areas where the colonialists lived, and then the senior government officials also lived. So my dad lived there. My dad was a commissioner, so he lived there. And we had this then, so they would have this really nice houses, and then they would build like a guest house some distance. It's called the boys' quarters. It's called the boys' quarters because that guest house is built, maybe that's where your servants live, your workers, your drivers, your cleaners, your gardeners live. But people rent them out. They rent these places out because it's built like a proper house. It's just maybe it's like a 2-bedroom, sometimes it's a 1-bedroom. And we had this family that rented that place from us when we moved in there. But they were so poor. And, they were having kids. They had 5 kids. And, as kids, we didn't know. I remember the father worked at a bar. And then I think that in the night, then I think in the daytime, he went somewhere where they were to this building site where he goes to carry blocks. Mm-hmm. And there was this thing my mom used to do, which I found really, really touching. When we would have birthdays, my mom would ask those kids, go home, go dress up, and let's go together. And I still have those pictures till today. And these kids will go home, they will get dressed in their best clothes. And my mom had a Volkswagen Beetle at that time. Yeah, in the 80s, that was the car, you know.
That's
so
cool.
so we would all get into this car, we'll squeeze into this car, into my mom's car, and we would go for the birthdays together. And they would have a lot of fun, which I knew they would never have had such an opportunity ever. But my mom used to do these things from time to time. You know, if there's a birthday, she would just say, you know, all of you go get ready, let's go. And when we left the North in 1989, I mean, we didn't have internet, we didn't have Facebook, we lost contact. And I reconnected with these children, I think 5 years ago. I found a brother on Facebook, and I just sent him a message. I said, do you remember me? We grew up together, blah, blah, blah. Take a look at this picture. And then he comes back, he sends me a message to say, yes, I remember you. Look, send me your phone number. My wife just had a baby. My mom is here.
Oh, cool.
But it felt so good. You know, it felt so good. So yeah, so I think
and you know what I think I'm hearing too is that it was interesting. I was just thinking about this today, is that less judgment and more compassion. I think if we could start like
less judgment and more compassion, because the oldest daughter in that family, Josephine, that was her name. I will never forget how mornings always start in the family. In the morning, the first thing you would see is Josephine running and her mother chasing her with a stick. And then the mother would chase her down the road and then throw the stick. But that was how she grew up. Right. So I can imagine the kind of trauma. Maybe one day when we sit and talk about it, but you know, we are taught, oh, you know what, let go. It's happened. It's the past. There is no, I feel, one, we should be more forgiving of our parents, and two, there is no manual on the perfect parenting.
Right, and we're learning new stuff every day. So we just have to take what we're learning and, you know, bring it into yourself and share it if you can, and tell people, you know what, children do absorb what they're seeing and hearing, smelling, feeling. It really does impact their brain and then their lives for the rest of their lives. Yes. And I just want to really quick too to throw out neglect, because abuse is one problem, but neglect is another. And if you know of a child who just is being neglected and you love them, please surround them. Please let them know that they're loved. Please help the family find connections for that child, because neglect is just as detrimental as abuse.
Okay. So going back to your book, what I like here was, I like that you focused on Timmy and his feelings and not the negativity that was going on. I liked that, because I'm going to ask you to read your book in a bit, but I liked that you focused on Timmy's feelings. You know, there's just a lot about his feelings here. The first, let me start with the first page. He felt scared, then he was worried, he felt sick, he felt cranky and hungry, you know, he felt angry. He felt scared again. And I like that. I like the positive that the teacher is reflected in a positive light, where she talks about resilience here. So please read. I would like you to read your story to us, and then.
Okay, so Timmy heard a loud noise that scared him. He did not know what it was. Timmy went to bed that night and he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the scary noise. He was worried it would happen again. The next day, Timmy felt sick because he did not sleep. He did not want to go to school, but his mom said he had to. Timmy went to school. He felt cranky and hungry because he didn't eat his breakfast. He was tired and he could not focus on his schoolwork. At recess, Timmy's class went out on the playground, but he didn't want to play. He saw Jill and Susie playing. Timmy wanted to play, but he felt angry and he wasn't sure why. So he went and he sat on the bench alone. Jill and Susie saw Timmy, and then they walked over to the bench he sat on. They asked him why he wasn't playing. Timmy told Susie and Jill about the loud noise, how scared he was, and how worried he would hear it again. Susie remembered a few things that their teacher taught them about being brave through hard times. She called it resilient. Susie said the teacher told us that when you are going through a hard time, you should try to talk to someone you trust. You can trust us, said Jill. Timmy said, I remember that the teacher said when you were feeling unhappy, you should pretend to smell a flower and then blow out all the air. Yes, said Susie. When you smell the flower, you breathe in through your nose, hold it in, and count to 3. 1, 2, 3, and then blow all the air out of your mouth. Let's try it. Timmy, Susie, and Jill smell the flowers and hold the air and count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Then blow out all the air. They did this for a few minutes until Timmy felt better. Then they got up to play. Timmy began to play ball. He caught the ball every time. His friends were so proud of him. Timmy, Susie said, you didn't drop the ball one time. Timmy said, yes, I am getting better at catching. Jill reminded the kids that the teacher said, saying positive things about yourself will help us be resilient too. When recess was over and Timmy saw his teacher, he said, today I didn't feel happy, but Susie and Jill reminded me how to be resilient. First, I talked to my friends. Then I smelled the flower. I held my breath and counted 1, 2, 3. And then I blew out all the air. And I feel so much better. I said something positive about myself. Oh, and now I remember, talking to a caring adult will help me be resilient too. I guess that's you. You're my favorite teacher. Timmy told the teacher about the scary sound he heard and how sick he felt this morning. He told his teacher he was scared he might hear it again. The teacher said, being resilient doesn't mean you won't ever feel scared, but it can help you feel better when you're feeling bad. Timmy remembered his stomach ache this morning, and he smiled at his teacher. I do feel better now. When the class all returned to their seats, the teacher said, okay, class, it's time to say one positive thing about yourself. When it was Timmy's turn to speak, both Jill and Susie thought Timmy would tell everyone that he caught the ball at recess, but instead, on his turn, Timmy stood up and said, I am resilient. And then the next page asks you, what makes you resilient? And I asked the children to write and draw pictures of people and activities that make them feel happy. And then to come back and write more. So then when they need to see those things, they have them in the book. And then the very back page is tips for caregivers. So we have worked with kids on breathing when they're in a happy or calm mood. When they're in an unhappy mood, they're unlikely to try it for the first time, but they'll use it after they've learned it as a skill. Remind your children who they can trust in your family and neighborhood. Encourage your children to voice their opinion if something doesn't feel right. Encourage your children to join groups, activities, or spend time with friends. And of course, reach out to me for a training or a speaking engagement, or just to ask some questions about ACEs and trauma-informed care. The end.
This is beautiful. So what are some tips you can give to aspiring authors who are interested in writing about such heavy topics?
Okay, I think that they really need to pay attention to the audience that they're writing for. And read a lot of books for that audience first, because I think the way you speak through an adult voice to a child is different than a child reading it for themselves. And this is meant to be something that adults and children read together, talk about together, and learn together. Where if you're writing a book for like an older student, a middle school student, they're going to be reading this information alone. Very different. I would definitely make sure that you are aware of what your audience's knowledge level is and what they could handle and and encourage them. If you're going to write a book about hard topics to children who are reading it to themselves, encourage them not to hold it in. Encourage them to go and find people to talk about these topics with. Okay. Encourage them to maybe join a book club of other children their age to read through these topics. But I think that knowing who your age group is really important. Adults are expected to be reading alone, expected to learning maybe difficult topics, but it still doesn't hurt to let people know that it's never too late to get a protective factor. It's never too late to connect and talk about the things that bother you to help you grow and learn so that you can forgive yourself for things you've done and have empathy for others.
Okay, so as authors who write book stories that celebrate representation, how do you think such authors can support each other?
So I think that one of the interesting things is that when we're talking about culture, I think that being real to what people are experiencing, not what should be happening, but what is happening. Okay. And sometimes if it's disappointing as you're writing it and you're saying, oh, this isn't necessarily the best, that's okay. It's educational. It's a place to learn. It's a place to grow from. But a lot of times you're going to find some really amazing things if you're staying true and you're not trying to write a story. You're trying to teach, right? So I think like for me, it's about teaching as opposed to writing a story of enjoyment just to enjoy. That's not the type of author I ended up being. I want people to get something out of it. I want them to learn and grow. And I think that if no matter who you're writing to, you always let them know there's room to learn and grow, find your voice and grow from it if you're talking about a hard topic.
Okay, so this book, did you self-publish or did you get traditionally published?
So I went through a non-traditional route. I knew somebody who had published books, so I went with her printing company. So they printed them for me. And then I got picked up on Ingram Spark, which allows me to sell these books online. The one that you and I have comes from Growingintoresiliency. It's this hard, like covered copy that you and I have. That's through my website. If you buy it through Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any of those, you'll get the same book. It'll just be the front cover has that, the inside is more paper. But I've not been picked up by a publishing company. Okay. This is all self-publishing. And I have been picked up by a company that does resilience activities, and they have my digital book on their website. That's called CRI.
Okay, that's
Resilience
great.
Initiative.
So what are some of the advantages of doing of self-publishing, of handling everything yourself? What are some of the advantages?
So I guess I compare it to when my son was little. He did some commercials and he had agents. Okay. And everything you did went through. So if he made $50 to say like Sparkle Sunshine on the radio, everybody got a piece of that. Okay. I compare it to that. If you're trying to get a publisher, there's one in my area that picks up a lot of books, but they take money from you. I don't like that. I think it should be a percentage of your
Vanity Press. Because
what's that?
That's called a Vanity Press when they take a lot of money from you, because a traditional publisher gives you, I think, 10%.
Yeah, so I think if you can get picked up by a traditional publisher, that's amazing, but they're just, if you want your story out there, there's other ways now to be an independent author and to get your book up on all the different vendor sites. It depends, I move, I'm like somebody who does things kind of like that. I don't want to wait for a publisher to choose me. I wanted to do it. I wanted to have my book out there. I wanted children to hear how to help themselves a little bit. So I think I didn't want to wait. And that's why one of the reasons I didn't go to traditional publishers. There's a very long process. And then what if they came back and they didn't want to tell my story?
Yeah, that happens a lot. So I'm an adult writer. My adult books are traditionally published. But when I decided to start writing for children, I went through all the rejections and all of that. And I remember reaching out to a consultant and saying to her, why are my books getting rejected? And she said, well, the number of words are too many, so many things. And I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to go do it myself. And that was how I got these 2 books done.
All right. Yes.
So,
yes.
Barry, Crowning Glory. I just did it myself. And then I went as far as I also created dolls.
Oh, I love them.
Yeah, I created dolls because I just want, it's just that I feel that it can be capital intensive if you want to get it into, like, if I had a fair to go for now, to attend. I could just order.
Yeah, I have the flowers. I sell with my books.
Yeah, you see? So I'm still working on that, on how to get everything together. But what I love about self-publishing is you do everything yourself. If you make $100, the $100 comes to you. Nobody's taking a percentage. It's left for you. You have autonomy. I think that's the word.
You do there is, like, if someone buys a book from my website, I will get 100%. But if it goes through, like, Walmart or any of those, somebody's taking percentage.
Yeah, somebody's taking from,
Yeah, definitely.
So what are some tips you can give adults on in regard to managing children who have experienced trauma? What are some tips?
Okay. So what I say is let them know that that they've had a tough time and that they don't have to talk about it, but that you're aware. And if ever they just need a hug, or if something feels weird because of what they've been through, that they have a safe place to come. And then talk about who else feels safe, because sometimes you're not going to be there and something could happen. So if you're sending your child to school, I would say, who's your favorite teacher? That teacher doesn't need to know what's happened. That's the thing, is that the story doesn't have to be told again, ever, if the child doesn't want to tell the story. But to know that there are people there that care about you on a bad day, that are just going to give you, let you come and sit in their classroom and sip on some water till you feel better, and you never had to say what happened. But just to know that there's that adult. And for all teachers to understand that if your child's having a hard time in the classroom, to be that safe person, to not get mad, but to start thinking to yourself, maybe they need some empathy. Maybe this is the place I should start. And if they're too mad to accept empathy, well, then they're still in their limbic system and they need some time to come out of it, and they need to calm down. So then you need to talk about, like, what could we do to get you to feel better? Because there's a circle that we teach that's on the outside, it's red. And in the middle, on the middle ring, it's yellow. And in the middle circle, it's green. And they put it on the wall and they say to the students, how do you feel? And if they're red, you don't even try to talk yet. And if they're yellow, we'll wait a little bit, but I'm your safe person. So when you're in the green, we'll chat about it.
Okay.
It just respects that person's nervous system to be able to calm down before they can talk. And a lot of times when you see teachers or parents getting frustrated, both people are in their limbic system, nobody is in their frontal lobe. And so obviously there's not going to be a really calm conversation. So as an adult, if you feel yourself getting triggered, if there's another adult or even another peer that your child could go hang out with, it's okay to be upset. And it's okay to say to your kid, hey, you want to go to, Sandy's house next door for a little while? I'm going to take a break. You could take a break. Let's, come back when we're both feeling a little more in the yellow or green.
Okay, great. So this flyer here says, the course for educators and caregivers. So this book, Timmy is Resilient, is a resource to teach resiliency skills. Talk to us about your course for educators and caregivers.
Okay, so I have on Community Resilience Initiative every second Friday of the month. Okay. The book is digital, and you can buy it on their website. And then what we'll do is we'll go through the digital book. We'll talk about some of these things that we've talked about today, and we'll show how to use the book with students. Then there's activities, which is really cool, because in the end, there's like block building activities where students, it's almost like a daily affirmation. They could come in, they could pick which ones they're feeling good about, move them, make a little block thing. There's puzzles, there's drawing activities, and places to build positive thoughts, positive affirmations that they can come back to, and they could be like, oh, I remember that day that I got 100 on that test, or that, you know, John said he liked my shoes. Whatever made them feel good that day could be in that place that they could then go and look at and be like, oh yeah, these are the things that make me feel good. So it's on Community Resilience Initiative, and you can purchase the book, the digital book, and sign up for a class that way. Of course, if you can't make it on the second Friday of the month and you want to book with me, you absolutely can still do that. You could just reach me at growingintoresiliency@gmail.com.
Okay. And, you know, I'm just reading about the author here. You know, something I really like that you put here, where you said, Patti has recognized the importance of teaching resiliency skills at an early age. So my very first proper job was as an English teacher. And what I really enjoyed then was when I realized that some kids had the gift of storytelling and writing. You know, I would give them a project and say, okay, you know, the project for this bank holiday will be go home, write a story, do the illustrations, bring it back, and I will assess. Or if we had free time, let's do a reading competition. Okay, the boys and children have this thing about they love writing on the board. That's what I noticed. So I would get a boy and a girl and say, okay, you will write for the girls, you will write for the boys. Okay. So, Anna, because I discovered it's important to teach them concentration. So we had this popular story we were always reading called The Stubborn Goat. So I would just go, pick a boy, start. Then he starts reading. Then we go, stop. The next person pick. So the only way you are able to get it is if you are following the story. And then we do spelling competitions. Spell this. So if you get the spelling, you get 10. If you don't get it wrong, if you get it wrong, you get 0. So I really, really enjoyed doing that with the kids. And, you know, especially when I find them in situations where they lack confidence, I like talking to them, telling them, you can do it. You are great. You are amazing. And I would have teachers coming to the school. Who is Auntie Louisa? Who is Miss Louisa? My child keeps talking about this teacher, you know, and for me, that fulfillment. So how important do you think it is to teach kids about resiliency and positive self-talk from a very early age? How important?
Absolutely, because even the activity that you did, if you stop, now we know it's affecting our nervous system, right? So if you stop and you say, okay, we just had a really fun time, we were all laughing, it was so good, and you feel smart and good, how does your body feel? Doesn't that feel great? Okay, so this is where, when you're feeling a little sad, you could take some breaths and try to come back to this feeling. So you kind of have them acknowledge what your body feels like, when it's feeling okay and positive, and then teaching some breathing skills and speaking to people, protective factors that can help them get back to that. But I think it's important, if we don't acknowledge like how you feel when you're feeling giddy, that when you're feeling bad, it's hard to get back to it.
Okay. So what would you like to see for your book? What hopes do you have for your books?
Wow. I don't know. I
like your honesty.
I didn't, the goal was to write this book and just be behind it, talking about it whenever I could, because I feel that it's important for children to learn these skills and for families to learn these skills. I guess if it could be, I don't know, if it could just be in every classroom, preschool, families that have children, that would be my goal, is just for people to have it and understand. And if they don't have the book, to at least have the conversation about, you know, child development and making sure that they feel safe and heard and seen. And that doesn't mean just giving them a choice of shoes in the morning. It means letting them know that if they had a bad time, they have people that they could trust to help them. So I don't know. I don't really have like a goal. I want it out there. I want people to know about it.
Okay. And if people want to buy your books, where can they go?
Okay. So to get this these are the special edition ones that I purchased that have the hard pages all the way through. You can reach out to me at Growingintoresiliency.
Okay.
Then for the book that has the paper pages, we are on Amazon,
Okay.
Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, and there's a few other sellers, but those are the ones that I'm aware of that tend to sell them regularly.
Okay, so and what are your social media handles? Are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook?
So it's Growing Into Resiliency is my Facebook and Instagram. And it used to be Ask a Mom before I wrote this book and got a business called Growing Into Resiliency. So I had followers on my Ask a Mom where I was just giving advice to parents. And now I have it changed to Growing Into Resiliency.
Okay, so Growing Into Resiliency on Facebook and also Growing Into Resiliency on Instagram.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any more words of wisdom you would like to add to this conversation?
Yeah. When you're thinking about this stuff, just be forgiving to yourself. We've all made mistakes. We've all experienced things that maybe we didn't work our way through because we didn't know. So as you're learning about it, give yourself some understanding because it is new information. So that's what I want to say.
Okay. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Patti Demma.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you for sending me this book. It's going to be on my enchanted bookshelf.
Yay.
My nieces and nephews are going to read it. Yes, and I'm also going to talk about it. So
that's wonderful. I appreciate it. That's what I want, right? That's my goal, is after each conversation, someone to then talk about it to the next person.
Yeah. So I'm very, very grateful for things like this when I get to meet people like you. You know, send me your work. Happy to chat about what you do.
Yeah, and if you ever want to reconnect, to talk more, or if you have a group of people that want to talk, it doesn't have to be about the book. It could just be about this topic. That's what this is all about. And so don't be a stranger.
I'm working on stuff for authors in different pockets. So now this one, because the author I spoke with earlier was talking about bullying. So I'm just thinking, so I'm just going to, because if I decide to put all authors together, there'll be too many things to talk about. So I'm just going to put them in pocket. Okay, resilience, bullying, this type of things, one pocket. Then another set, one pocket. So I'm still working on things
I like that.
I will do with authors, and I will be in touch. I'm just happy, and I feel it's such a blessing to have this platform to talk to authors and learn from them and also teach others.
Yeah. It's really fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm really, really blessed to be part of this. Thank you so much for including me.
Okay. So thank you so much, Patti. I wish you all the best,
Thank you. Nice to meet you. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.